Alright, response video to the Modern Mystic. So I'm going to put this camera down, see what happens. A little noise on this laptop, but you'll have to live with it. Put the light on maybe. Don't know if that's really going to help much. Okay, so two videos. One on quantitative easing again, which is the government basically obliging the banks to create fake money that buys equities off the stock market, $4 trillion worth, which is more value than the three biggest banks have in holdings, their company holdings. So in 1 year, the federal government has put on the market more equity than the banks own. Huge amount of money thrown into the markets. The markets blew up, have bubbled tremendously. And he says they can just do this forever. They can just keep the rich getting richer without even the rich having to do anything. They can just sit on what they own and just have the government just keep buying stock and keep inflating the stock prices, and it'll work forever, or something like that. Obviously it won't work forever. It won't work at all. He called it desperation. Somebody has anyway. It's an act of desperation. It's not an act of, oh, this is a great strategy. We figured out the free lunch. Perpetual energy. Well, anyway, the simple response to his, I don't see how this can be a problem, is in these documents that he keeps talking about, okay? The Bank of England and whatever explained that basically, look, banks create digits, debt digits, and those digits come back as deposit liabilities. So the problem with the banks creating these fake digits, this imaginary money that the federal government said, make it. Here, we'll keep it in reserve accounts. We owe you $4 trillion. Make the fake digits, buy the equities, make everything look like it's more valuable than it really is, bid everything up, right? This is just a bidding war. So yeah, increases the bids because inflation in the stock market is good, right? So inflating the fake money is good for the economy. Inflating the real money, now that's a problem. And that's what this all comes down to. What is the real money? What is the real value? So he made a second video on work and claims that money doesn't equal work. But that's what it does reduce to. So I'll explain why it does reduce to that. And, these arguments are not complicated. And for him to be so arrogant in what I see as just being blatantly wrong, fuck, this isn't even going to be difficult to argue. He thinks energy is free. Sorry, it isn't. The value of it is mostly dictated by the fact that it's scarce and it takes a lot of hardware that takes a lot of work hours to make. You know how long it takes to make an oil platform for the Gulf of Mexico? You know how much labor is invested in that thing? And then the labor to run it? Hugely labor intensive. Yes, the Arabs it's not the price of the getting it out of the ground, the man hours, it's the price of the fee, the rent that the owner charges. But regardless, we know that the value of the energy, its price, is dictated largely by the labor it takes to get it to market, into a usable form that you can pour into your car and make it go vroom vroom. So anyway, back to QE. So anyway, these fake digits that the banks have been encouraged to create come back to the bank as a deposit, okay? Or they come back to the bank in the sense that the bank sells some asset it has and it takes its digits back, okay? The digits come back. And when they come back as a liability in the sense that they have to be convertible to cash eventually. In the sense that, let's say if I put a deposit account of $1 trillion in a bank, $1 trillion of these fake digits that were made to buy equities. So somebody, the bank gave the equities to some rich fuck. Let's just take the $4 trillion as one bulk sum. So they took $4 trillion, they gave it to some rich fuck, bought the crap he had. So we take the crap he had, and it is crap. And now he has $4 trillion in digits. And let's just say in the real world he would exchange that for this and this and this, and make a lot of transactions. But in the end, that money will go into a bank as a deposit. So let's just forget about all the interactions that take place and just say, what's the end? Well, the end is he takes the money, goes to the bank, opens a deposit account for $4 trillion. Now, what happens, let's say, if there's some sort of happening in the world that threatens the liquidity of the banks, or threatens the notion in that guy's head that that money is secure in his bank. And he says, I want cash. I want the deal, okay? I want the real stuff. So he goes to the bank and withdraws $4 trillion. Well, he's not going to withdraw 4 trillion bank digits. He's going to want the cash. And he's entitled to the cash. And guess what? There's only $1 trillion of cash in circulation. So somehow they have to cycle an awful lot of cash through his account to finally pay him off in cash. And where are they going to get that cash? Well, they're going to go to the people who owe them cash. And one of the people that owe them cash is going to be the federal government that owes them $4 trillion that are sitting in that reserve account. Or else they're going to have to sell the equities that they bought. The junk they bought from the trillionaire, now they're going to have to sell that crap on the market. And the market's crashing at the time. So yeah, it's going to be a little hard to sell crap on a crap market that's crashing. So now what's going to happen? Yeah, we're going to come up with $1 trillion to pay off $4 trillion. Now what's going to happen? You need $3 trillion. Well, that's only $1 trillion more than you collect in income taxes. So now what are you going to do? I mean, if you took all the income taxes and just paid off the one transaction. What are you going to do? Oh, I guess you might have to start printing cash, because you're not going to have any cash. You're not going to have enough cash to pay these liabilities. And so in the end, this is all contracts. I mean, damn it, people. The only thing that has real value is the stuff. Okay? And the reason why stuff has value, he talks about his house like it's, oh, well, because it was built in the past, it doesn't count. No, there's a ton of labor in his house. To build his house now, for me to build his house, I'd have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, no doubt, in labor and materials. And the materials are labor again, right? Somebody has to carve the wood and cut it and move it and do all this crap. So all of it's labor intensive. So the labor is what makes it valuable. And the replacement cost is probably more or as much as the cost of the house to buy. And that's the value. So the stuff has value because of the labor in it. And then these digits have value in that they're a promise on labor. So when you borrow money, you're borrowing on your future productivity. You're borrowing on your capacity to do work, to make money, to pay the debt. And that's the connection between money, cash, and work value. And so it's just silly to sit there and say, well, it doesn't, Marxist theory and all this other crap. I mean, it's more of dodging with this fucking, commie innuendo. I mean, fuck you and this shit. It's just obvious, I think. It's just obvious that labor is what makes things valuable. It's just fucking obvious. There's no free anything. There's no free anywhere in the world. The oxygen is somewhat free. Okay, yeah, we don't have to pay for that. But yeah, anything we have to pay for it because it has some fucking hands touching it, usually. Yes, some people have copyrights. They have certain other ways of manipulating the market and not being in a free market. And so, yeah, they can extort us for more money than the labor cost. But that's just another one of these vices of the rich. That's all they're doing, is extorting us, taking advantage of us. So now he started talking about stocks and Google's price and its inflation and all that kind of stuff. But again, the money that bought those stocks was all money built out of debt digits created on promises of some kind of future value. So somebody goes in to borrow money, they have to somehow have some capacity to pay the money back. So they either have to put something of real value as collateral. And he was talking like houses aren't real value. Yes, they're real value. They have work in them. That's the value of them, is that you can't acquire the labor to reconstruct the house. Housing bubbles have limitations. And the limitation on a housing bubble is the cost of building a new house. Obviously, old houses can't sell for much more than the cost of building a new house, so everybody just build a new house. Nobody would bother with buy the old house. So bubbles have a limitation on them, and that's the cost of building a new house. And building a new house is still pretty frickin' expensive. Especially with all the regulations and taxes and fees and everything else you have to spend to do that. So that's the limitation on the bubble. Now there's no limitation on the bubble of the stock market. Battery issue. Anyway, yeah, I got some old rechargeables, and I guess they're just not going to work. Anyway, so I don't know where I left off, but the value of that the housing bubble couldn't get out of control because of the cost of new construction. So as long as you can build a new house cheaper, then that would be the limit on the housing bubble. And the stock market doesn't have any ceiling, so you can bubble it and bubble it and bubble it and bubble it, and theoretically, there's no new construction, there's no new stock somewhere, some new value that's going to change how much you can bubble it, as long as people presume that, okay, well, it's worth $100, even though it's only worth 10 cents of real property I own. People will still give me the $100 for it, and they might even give me $110 for it tomorrow. So as long as I have the expectation that that might be where it's tending to go, people will hold it. And I'd argue that obviously the QE thing created a mechanism where people could look at the stock market and say, yeah, where else can it go but up? The federal government's buying stuff off of the market. Obviously the same amount of rich people exist as existed yesterday. Now there's less stuff for them to own and bid on. Obviously if there's less, if you have an auction, let's say you have one of those auctions for paintings, right? And you have a bunch of richies in the audience, and they're going to spend, because they want the tax deductions, $50 million as a collective. You just know it. And so you sell 10 paintings versus selling 50 paintings in the auction. You know that you're probably going to get a lot more money for the 10 paintings individually if you just sell 10 than if you sold the 50. The individual price per painting is going to change. And yeah, you take stuff off the market, then you're going to make the stuff on the market more valuable. So the painting prices go up. It's not that hard to figure this part out, right? Now they're going to stop buying soon, right? Well, soon, at the end of this year, maybe. And once they stop buying, then people are going to know, well, there's certainly no automatic pressure to drive the market up. So you don't have this free lunch anymore where you had an automatic thing that was going to make sure your painting was going to be worth more at the next auction. And now you have sort of an opposite scenario where, well, what if they actually have to sell some of this crap, okay, that they bought? Now all of a sudden there is going to be 50 paintings at the next auction. And maybe you don't want to be owning one of those 10 paintings now, because that painting in the 50, auction isn't going to get the same price. You're going to lose money. So people are going to start saying, well, what else can I do with my money? And what else can I do with my money? And they're going to look at all these other commodities and they're going to say they're all bubbled as hell. All right? They're all bubbled out of control. And so they might buy commodities. I mean, oil doesn't seem like a great deal at $110 a barrel or whatever it is. So, yeah, you might move to some kind of other wheat or corn or something like that. But that has a limit too, because people will not pay, $17 for a box of cornflakes. So if you keep inflating food prices, that ain't going to win, because people who eat, generally speaking, aren't rich. Most of the people who eat aren't rich. So they can't pay whatever price you decide the market says you have to pay for it, because Richie says the commodity is now going to be like gold. You're going to inflate it out of its useful purpose, because you need a commodity to own. So they're going to figure out that doesn't have any upward potential, because obviously as the price goes up, there'll be a point where you can't sell the product anymore, and then you're going to have an oversupply. And certainly the higher you make the price, the more you encourage people to grow this stuff. So if corn prices go way up, then all the farmers grow corn, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden you have a glut of corn. Or 2 years down the road. So that doesn't look too stable either. And so they might just say, look, the only thing that's really stable in this environment is cash. There's only $1 trillion of it. It hasn't been printed, so it's pretty secure. So maybe I'll just, resort to cash. No inflation. So yeah, it looks like a good choice. So all of a sudden there's going to be a demand for cash. And, then that may give the government some kind of encouragement. When there's a cash, when cash is wanted and valuable, in the short run, it'll say, okay, we can sneak some in there. Let's print some. Let's get away with that cheat. But we know that cheat comes home to roost, because that does create inflation. And that inflation will devalue cash, and then people will be looking for something that's not cash again. But the bottom line is, what it all comes down to is it's all a promise on work. So, money is a contract. That's what a dollar bill is. Okay, it's a guaranteed contract by the federal government that's basically saying there's only so much of this stuff, and you can always convert it. Okay, we'll give you stuff for it. You give us cash, the government says we'll give you stuff. You pay your taxes in this stuff called cash, theoretically. It's good. That's what it is to the federal government. It means the value of the labor that it can purchase in the world. And that's its value. Everything's going to reduce to this again, the value of work. And what has to be understood is that there's not a lack of work that needs to be done in the world. There's all kinds of work that needs to be done. There's a ton of need in the world, right? There's a ton of Africans that need a house, like a shed even, just something with a roof, that can keep some of the bugs out, some of the wild animals. So there's a ton of need in the world, and yet there's not a ton of demand for labor, because labor can't extract any price, because the rich have devalued it, because they have all this money that says they're owed work first. So their money demands the attention of labor rather than need demanding the attention of labor. So we're not working based on the need of people, we're working based on the need to maintain the equity value of the owner's debt slips. Their promises that we will work for them. So that's the only work that gets done, is the fulfilling the old promises to do the work that was borrowed. So when the federal government borrows money on the market, it's essentially borrowing on our labor. It's saying that America will have Americans do work, they'll pay taxes, and then we'll pay back the debt with the taxes. And yet they never pay back the debt, right? So it just becomes an accruing rental contract. So everything the government buys on that debt money, like the tanks in World War II might have cost $50,000, and we have over time paid $7 zillion for each one, or 7 billion, whatever. It's some big, huge, giant number that we paid for all that hardware, because we never paid back that debt. We just keep paying rent. We rented the tanks, and we're still renting them, even though they've rusted down to a little tiny cube. We're still paying for them, because we never finished the debt. We never completed the debt. We just keep refinancing the debt. And so we just pay interest every year, forever, to the rich man who lent us the money for something we've already used up. And all of that requires labor to pay that interest. So these loafers, these rich loafers, sit around, do nothing, and they just keep collecting IOUs for labor, work. Okay, they keep collecting promises that we will do work for them in the future. So we've already, look, Nick has already conceded that there's different kinds of money slips. So I've stated the deed was the stuff. He's using the word stuff now, which is funny, right? Because he laughed at me using it originally, and now he's using that word. Because yes, stuff is the best you can have. Having the actual deed to stuff is the best money you can have. Best piece of paper. Now the second best is reserve, Federal Reserve notes, and the third best is the actual cash. Okay, and then you get into bank digits, and then you get into stocks and bonds and all this other kind of crap paper. They're the least secure contracts. So you have a guaranteed contract, which is a deed, and then you move up on the scale of less and less valid contract until eventually you end up with some sort of Barbie funhouse contract. I mean, the stock market is just complete bullshit contracts, but they still represent how much wealth claims the rich possess. So it's mostly rich people that own the stock market. 85% of it is owned by 1% of the people, and it's just an accruing, it's just them collecting, okay, IOU slips on future labor. So they just keep collecting them. They keep taking these interest fees, this IOU, work in the future, and that's all these stock certificates, everything. It just says IOU, work in the future. And it's just a way of them collecting those and putting them in a market where they can have some fun. I mean, the stock market is integral to the function of an economy. It's not. It's a complete abstraction. It's a gambling house set up outside of the real market. But the same, and it's a way of disguising inflation, right? It's a way of taking the inflation that would exist if people had to buy actual businesses with their extensive wealth. They would be outbidding each other all the time for the businesses, because they'd have this desperate need to create a deed, because they want deeds. They don't want Barbie money, they want deeds, but deeds are too expensive. So that was sort of the problem, is they would be pricing the price of actual industry insanely, and that's the one that has the ceiling, right? The rich can only get so rich in that world because all of a sudden it becomes ludicrous, because there's nothing to buy. So they have to create a fake market that doesn't have any ceiling, so they can have a place for their insane wealth to accrue. You know, it sounds, it's like you have to create a fake. They have so much, they have so many claims. You can't have the claims as real good contracts, because if they existed as real good contracts, it would create preposterous inflation in value, because they would be outbidding each other all the time with all their more and more IOUs they'd be collecting. There's only a limited number of businesses that keep overpricing everything. So they can overprice in this fake little stock market-y thing, and it doesn't affect the real economy beyond the fact that they still hold all those claims. And if those claims are ever, if that stock market value is ever attempted to take a real claim on the cash that it's claiming to, it's a claim on cash. Stocks are a claim. Everything is, all paper money is a claim on cash in the end. And cash is a claim on labor. Yeah, can I say that simpler? Okay, all paper money is a claim on cash, and cash is a claim on labor. Or deeds. Like I said, deeds are old labor. Debt or digits are a claim on future labor, including cash. Cash is essentially a claim on future labor. You don't buy the labor in the past, you buy tomorrow's labor. I get the cash today, I buy something tomorrow, which is buying tomorrow's labor, essentially. Alright. Yeah, so I think that does it. Yeah, if you could follow along, but this really isn't that complicated. QE is just inflating the rich man's, you know, the bubble house. And it has an infinite ceiling, and the real game is they had to, it was the banker game, right? The banks were bankrupt, and the only way to make them unbankrupt is to restore equity prices so they could get rid of junk. Alright, so they could get junk back on the market or get a price for junk. And so I don't think the banks are going to be interested in buying the market. I think they're doing exactly the opposite. I think they're going to unload into this market. I think any smart rich man is going to be unloading into this market. and it doesn't have a future because now it has this huge liability that's put on the, like I said, $4 trillion has now been created as a liability on the bankers' books, and that liability has to be realized, has been guaranteed essentially by the federal government. That's what the $4 trillion in the reserve accounts are. It's a promise to pay the banks $4 trillion in cash if they need it. You know, and all you need is somebody to start moving, like even gesturing towards the withdrawal window, you know, and you're going to have your run on the bank. See, the run on the bank was a run on cash. That's what I'm 1929. That's what the run on the banks were. It was a run on cash. People wanted real value. They didn't want a check with a bank's name on it. They didn't want some other piece of crap paper. They wanted cash. And we're essentially creating the same circumstance here, where you have a ton of paper that doesn't mean much, just says some kind of crap on it. And once people say this crap doesn't look like crap to have, that crap is going to start devaluing because it's been completely bubbled in its value. So they've gotten a big free lunch out of an illusion of value, but that illusion can never be realized. It's a fake market. It can never be extracted as actual work. The debts can't be paid. So that's even if all these debt contracts could be paid and people could actually pay what they owe. Like I could pay my $300,000 of my share of the national debt. Like somehow people could do that. They could go to work and go to work for the government, you know, to pay them back. Like they could actually do that. Even if that were possible, that all this debt could be realized in some sort of rational time frame, like 10 years or something, short of a gulag at our peach a day kind of labor. But that's the real point. It's a friggin' promise on labor, and there's nobody can do all of this work that they've promised they're going to do for these debt slips, the creation of them, and so it can't be resolved. But even if it could, the market doesn't reflect the actual value of it. And the stock market especially is just a fake place, you know, where rich people go to get richer. And it doesn't have anything to do with real value. It just has to do with giving rich people basically take in an IOU, and then they just make a deal with each other to say, well, you have a slip that's worth 20 hours of labor. Well, let's just raise that and put 30 hours on it. And he agrees to say to that, and they exchange it by just inflating the prices of it. So they take an IOU that was created for 20, and they turn the IOU that was created for 20 into one created for 50. So now they're claiming they're owed 50 hours of work, when the original IOU was created for 20 hours of work. So they've just made a problem that's unmanageable even with legitimate loaning. Even if you just go with the bank digits, people can't pay back the debt. But if you go by the stock market inflated claims on labor, that's impossible. It could never be done. So yes, it's a fake, stupid market. It only works because the government has propped it up now, and it's going to crash. Okay, let's just play it out, right? QE ends. People realize the market has very little upward potential. It only has downward potential. They start saying, well, I got to find somewhere else to put my money. Stock market starts falling. As the stock market falls, people are going to start panicking, especially the leveraged people and the margined people. They're going to have to find equity to pay their bills, so they're going to ask other people to pay their debts, and everybody's going to start asking everybody to pay debts and to start resolving things in cash, and that's going to make cash more and more valuable and stocks less and less valuable, and so the balance is going to flip, and once the illusion of value is broken, stock markets have proven they can fall a long way before they get to something real, before they get back to what they're really worth, which is maybe that originally created debt slip that was worth 20 hours of labor it's not worth the 50, and maybe you can only get 10 if you're lucky. So maybe you can get 10 hours labor for that 20 debt. You're going to have to accept a 50% haircut on what it originally was valued, and you're going to have to accept 100% or a 50%, well, whatever, a big cut based on the current stated value. And just remember, so when the stock market falls, revenues to the government fall, so the government doesn't going to be getting money in anymore. When the rich aren't rich anymore, all of a sudden the government's not going to be flowing with cash. And so what's it going to do when it has to pay the bankers $4 trillion? Oh, it's going to sell the crap it has. And when it sells it, it's only going to get back half of what it paid for it. So it bought high, it's going to sell low, and it's still going to owe $2 trillion. And where's it going to get that cash from? It's going to print it. And that's when the game is really going to be over. So anyway, I don't think in any way you have underdone the simple theory that everything that has value because of the labor it takes to get it, except for stuff that's copyrighted or stuff that is owned outright. Yes, there are places in the world where people can extort you. Microsoft can extort me for an operating system that has a ton of other software runs on top of it, and he can extort me and say, pay me or else. Yeah, he can do that because he has a copyright. He has a legal right to extort, not based on labor value. But in most circumstances, in most of the markets, labor, the price of labor, is dictating the price of money. Alright, enough. Till next time. Or the value of cash.